Happy Sunday, everybody, and welcome to the Nona Boss Continuum. And I've got another amazing guest for you guys. But first, I know that everybody is really dying to hear about my trip last week to the Ozarks and the happenings during the expedition. And they were off the charts. We had a really, really, really eventful Saturday night. And we're going to get to that. And I promise you guys, we're going to talk about that. But I got to be just a little slow in getting some of that information out to you guys. Want to time it just right with some other things that are kind of happening around said encounter. So we will get that to you guys. Promise you, just stay tuned and hang in there with me just a little while longer to get all the deets on the happenings on Saturday night. So while I am also, right before I bring on my guests, I just want to really quick, I do want to welcome Larry Newman, who is a new member of the channel. Larry, thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. And I want to just say hi to everybody in chat. I saw Mr. Gary Spikes is here. Hey there, Gary. And it was great to meet you at the conference last weekend. And if you guys hang on until a little later, I'm going to show a few photos of everybody that I got a chance to meet. And hi there, Moon at Noon. It's good to see you. Meredith, thank you. You are so sweet. It's good to see you too, hon. And Mr. Tim T in Florida. Hey there, Tim. And Waynette. I hope you guys are doing amazing. And Mr. Pyromedic, I got to meet you as well last weekend at the conference, and that was a blast. And let's see, we've got Roger, Mr. Roger Blair. We've got also Henry in the house and Miss Catherine Gay. I also got to meet her last weekend, her and her husband. It was a blast. I wish that we had, been able to kind of spend some more time together, but we literally came out of the woods to the conference. And then literally the second the conference was over, we were right back out into the woods again. So I wish we'd had more time. Hey there, Jean. How are you? Let's see. Did I miss anybody? Miss Val. Hey there, Val. So good to see you here. Let's see. Did I miss anybody? If I missed anybody, my apologies. Mr. Jay Fritz. Hey there, Jay. And I think I got everybody. Just guys, hang in there with me. You're going to get the full story. I promise you. And I'm working on, it's the timing. It's all about timing sometimes, right? And I know that there's going to be next month, Daniel Perez of the Bigfoot Times. It looks and it appears he's going to be dedicating his entire October issue of the Bigfoot Times to the encounter that we were all a part of on Saturday night. So stay tuned for that as well. So without further ado, let's get down to it. And let me introduce my guest. Mr. Christopher Balzano is a writer, a researcher, a folklorist, and current host of the podcast Tripping on Legends. He has been documenting the unexplained since 1994 and has been a figure in the paranormal world through his book, articles, and his work as the director of the Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads and now Tripping on Legends. Christopher Balzano is the author of several books about regional hauntings, dark woods, cults, crime, and the paranormal in the Freetown State Forest and ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, as well as the collection of true ghost stories, ghostly adventures, and the how-to paranormal books, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting and Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. His book, Haunted Objects, Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelf, captures stories of everyday people who have accidentally allowed spirits into their house. His most recent book is Haunted Ocala National Forest. Central Florida is known as the happiest place on earth, but an hour's drive from the amusement parks lies a forest swirling with mystery. For generations, locals have whispered about a dark energy coming from the Ocala National Forest and drifting into nearby towns. So please let's welcome Mr. Christopher Balzano.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for that great introduction, although you prefaced it by saying, hey guys, I've got some really cool stuff, but not this week, so here's Christopher Balzano.
No, it definitely didn't mean to do that way.
I know.
Everybody is really dying to hear what happened last weekend, and it's just, we're just need to keep it just a little, under wraps a little bit, until some other pieces of the puzzle kind of get brought together. And so, yeah. So I just kind of,
hopefully it's not consolation prize Christopher Balzano that we're talking about.
No, definitely not. You are a star in your own right. You know that. So
and my mom thinks I'm handsome, so that's all.
So you and I we wanted to talk, and we started to talk a little bit backstage, but we were kind of like, let's hold it, time out, let's hold it for the show, because one of the things that the biggest misconception about Florida, the state of Florida, is that all we have are beaches and bars. And that is so not the case.
Right. I'm Florida man.
Yeah.
I think that people always ask, what is it like? Why are there no ghost stories out of Florida? Like, why are there no? I was talking with I was doing a presentation, and my 9th grade English teacher from New Hampshire happened to be living in the town and was there. And she's like, yeah, there's not a lot of ghost stories here. And, Florida's not that old. And I'm like, yeah, except for the fact we have the oldest city in the United States. Like, there's a misconception because Florida is what we think of when we think of the cities of Florida, right? So people have this misconception or this idea of Florida as Miami, Tampa, Orlando, maybe Jacksonville, all of which, other than Orlando, which you can't even include as a real place, are coastal cities, right? And there are coastal cities. I mean, we have a huge coastline, but the real Florida is once you get off that coast. And I always say to people that Florida, to get a ghostly legend, or to, in the case of cryptids, like build up a mystique and a lore and a history of cryptids, you have to be generational. In other words, your father tells you something that he heard from his grandfather, and these things are passed down. They have had enough time to kind of gestate and form, and you don't have that in the coastal cities because they're transient. People come and go all the time there, and they're kind of in one particular mindset. Once you get out of that, and once you start getting into, I always say Central Florida is not this way, it's this way. Once you get into that area, that's where you start to see people who have lived in the same town for several generations or lived in the same area. And so they're much more likely to have these stories. And in the case of especially cryptids, they're much more likely to, you probably agree with this aspect, they're much more likely to know their environment well enough to go deep into their environment to see cryptids and to notice when something is off where they are. If you're a new person and you go someplace, everything is off because you're new there. But if you lived in a place like the Ocala, like when I was doing the book, I talked to a lot of people who are generational. They notice when like trees are weird or when a rock is no longer there. Like, and it's that kind of knowledge you have to have in your environment and the ability to go deep into some of these places before you really start to touch upon what is weird and unusual. You're not going to find Bigfoot or a ghost walking down the streets of South Beach. It's just not going to happen.
No, no, not happening.
Right.
Although I will say I've had plenty of encounters west of Palm Beach. So I think if some of the millionaires actually knew how close they were to some of these cryptids and creatures, maybe their property values might diminish a little bit.
Right, but even if you say Palm Beach, like that's no one would even know where that is because I cover something that's in West Palm Beach, but West Palm Beach is on the East Coast, and so there's a little while ago we did we were tracking a haunted tale that's in Boca Raton, right? These kind of 3 different stories that are in there, which you probably are very familiar with, and I grew up hearing about Boca Raton because I'm Italian American, and that's where you retired to. So I knew nothing about it geographically or where it was on a map, right? I knew it was in Florida only because they mentioned it on a Seinfeld episode. But other than that, I think there was a basic misunderstanding of what the geography of Florida is. People know that there are the Everglades, but they don't realize that the majority of the Everglades are not this vast, dark swamp, but these swampy lands that are perfect for a lot of unexplained things to find their way into. So,
So let's talk about, do you want to start talking about like your most recent book, or do you want to start let me ask you this. What is your number one favorite Florida cryptid?
My number one favorite Florida cryptid. Wait a minute. I've loaded up slides. Can I show it?
Of course.
Beautiful. All right. I think, do you have to pull that up?
Yeah.
Or can I? Beautiful.
There we go.
Not her, but this. This is my number one Florida cryptid because I feel that this is the common factor in a lot of unexplained animal sightings and unexplained animal attacks or cryptid attacks that happen in the west area of Florida, right? Really? So if you imagine, so for those people who are not in Florida, imagine Orlando or where you think Orlando is and travel about an hour north and you get to the town of Ocala. Okay, so now stick a little pin in there and now stick a little pin in where you think Tampa is on the west coast. All in the woods and swampy parts and the green marsh and all that stuff in that area, this creature right here, the Stikini, is seen.
Right? I have never heard of this.
Okay, I'm glad you haven't because now, beautiful. So the Stikini are, so this is great because it's such a hodgepodge and it's as if you took everything creepy and just put it in a blender. These are Seminole, witch, vampire owls. And they are a Seminole legend, right? But they are seen in other places where Seminoles are. So Oklahoma has a high report count of these creatures, right? They are 6 to 7 feet tall. People rarely see them for more than a flash, but this is what happens. So let me tell you what a Stikini is, and then I'll tell you kind of like what some people have said of it. So the story goes that there's this goddess in the Seminole culture called She Who Walks the Circle. And she's allowed to kind of bestow magic upon women, especially. It's kind of like a vengeance demon from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She's allowed to bestow this power upon women who want to seek revenge on people. The most popular version of the story that involves like real life encounters is that there was a Seminole woman whose husband had been killed by some Americans, and then she had been raped. And so she called upon She Who Walks the Circle to grant her the power to get revenge. And so she was given this kind of superhuman power, and then she got revenge. She extracted revenge on the men who had done this But then she was like, well, you know what? There are some other people that have done me wrong as well, right? And so she continued to use this power. Now that was the goddess's hope all along, because she literally wanted to. She wants these monsters to be created. So every time she used this power that she had, just like the Wendigo or the Wendigo, she would lose a little bit more of her humanity and a little bit more of her humanity until she became what you're seeing right here. And that's obviously not a photograph, but a drawing, an interpretation of it. She became this thing that stalks the woods between Tampa and between the Ocala. So really between what used to be known as, so if you imagine 75, if you know Florida, all east of that, people report driving down the road and their car stalls. Like I'm talking about little roads, like back roads, or they're riding boats in the swamp or whatever, and everything just completely stalls. And then they start to hear this like smashing against their car, the smashing against the things of the boat, and they hear like the screech, the horrible screech of an owl. And then when they get back, they've got these marks on their vehicles. And so people were telling me these kinds of stories, and they were looking for me. Now I'm a ghost writer, right? Like I write about ghostly legends, like that's what I do. But as soon as I said I was writing the Ocala book, a lot of people were approaching me with these kinds of stories, asking me to kind of explain it. Like, what could it possibly be? And as I was reading, so the interesting thing is that there's this thing in Florida. So for my Florida people here, the Green Swamp, as Chris is saying, the Green Swamp area, there's this thing called the Dade Massacre. And the Dade Massacre is essentially when troops were making that trek, right? So American troops were making the trek from Tampa to Ocala to a place called Fort King, which is the real picture that you see right there. And on the way in what is now Bushnell, Florida, they were ambushed by the Seminoles. And of the 103 that were there, 101 were killed, and only 2 escaped. That's the story. That is the historical documentation. They celebrate it every year. Both sides celebrate it. It basically starts the Second Seminole War, which is huge in the history of Florida. But some Seminoles tell a different story. What they say is that the Stikini wiped out that column of American soldiers. 101 of them were wiped out pretty much like one at a time by the Stikini, like an entire coven of Stikini who would appear to them during the day as these beautiful women who would lure them into the woods. And at night, they would come as these blood-sucking, intestine-eating vampire owls that would drag them off from the camp. And so one of the people who was able to escape this because he went AWOL was this man who really did exist named James Sprague, who was a survivor of the Dade Massacre. But they say he escaped through the woods and he came upon this coven around a cauldron of like this bubbling, horrible smelling thing. And he was looking around and he was seeing his fellow soldiers like completely cut open and like their insides taken out. And then by the time he got back to Fort Brooks, he was completely insane with what had happened. So it's really interesting because you have a historical thing that happened. We can prove it happened, right? It was historic.
Right.
And then you have a Seminole legend about a cryptid who actually did it, which is insane because it was a Seminole victory. So why make up a legend about it? And then we have all of these reports that are in the same area today that while intestines are not being taken, you do have these weird attacks. And anyone who lives in Florida who watches the news, you don't see a news report ever in Florida without hearing the word Ocala mentioned, because the Ocala National Forest is ground zero for so many abductions or where people end up or where people are abducted from. And a lot of people, especially Seminoles, put forth that might be the Stikini still working.
That's I'm like, I am literally speechless. Like I have never heard this before. This is like mind blowing right now.
It's one of those stories that I don't even know. I think I was doing research on the Dade Massacre. And because I had keyworded the Dade Massacre, I found this story that I thought was obscure. And then I started to look into it more. And then I started to ask some Seminoles who I was working with other things. And they were like, oh, yeah, like that's totally a thing. And then even as recently as this week, I posted a story that was in an Oklahoma newspaper talking all about the legend of the Stikini and how it's still something that's believed as Bible truth by Seminoles still today in that area.
Okay, so she is this cryptid. She's a Seminole goddess.
No, the Seminole goddess gave her the power.
Oh, the Seminole goddess gave her the power, and
Yes.
she now is a vampire. Wait, say
that again. A vampire owl. So by day,
a vampire owl.
Yep. So by day, she's a beautiful woman, enough to lure people into the woods. By night, she's a vengeance-seeking owl vampire.
Wow.
It's one of those things that's almost, it's so over the top that it's almost, you can't make it up.
Yeah.
And this is not, there are Seminoles who widely acknowledge that the Dade Massacre was a military action and, and all those things like that. And yet there's also a large segment of them that still believe that, no, that's not really what happened. This is what happened. And then, of course, there are the ones in between who say the Stikini were the ones who allowed them to ambush them so successfully and stuff like that.
Okay, so the next time that I am in Ocala National Forest at night, because I've been there, I've heard some crazy things out there. I will definitely be double checking going, oh boy, like I'm really...
First of all, don't go to the Ocala National Forest unless you have to, because this is like the least of the things that will get you there. And you're perfectly safe, because it's important to remember for all the ladies in the audience, Stikinis are vengeful to men who have done wrong.
Thank you,
meaning that they're not just going all willy-nilly killing anybody. If you get attacked by a Stikini, chances are you have an adulterer with you, or you have someone who's been doing some sketchy things. And so you being so pure of heart and a female, you've got no problem whatsoever. I can go there freely because I'm a good guy, but other people might not be so.
Don't go there if you have an impure heart.
Right. If you're Catholic, go to confession first, unburden yourself, then feel free. Then feel free to just try to dodge all the serial killers who are with the Ocala and the cults, and you'll be fine.
I have to. Well, here's the thing, because I've been to Ocala, I've been to Ocala National Forest. I've done nighttime stuff and I've done daytime stuff. The daytime, I always it's this. I don't know. It feels like a very magical place during the day, but at nighttime, it's one of the places that really creeped me out big time. I would much rather be in the green swamp. I would much rather be down here in Big Cypress. I would much I don't know. There was just something about it at nighttime creeped me out.
First time I ever went anywhere near the Ocala, right? Well, it's kind of like the exact same thing you were talking about, the Bridgewater Triangle. I'm a city kid, and I was from Boston, so going to the Freetown State Forest, part of the Bridgewater Triangle, was crazy. It was like an hour and a half away. That's not the ghost person I wanted to be. I didn't want to be drawn into that. And I'm glad that I did, that I've been able to research it. And it was the same way with the Ocala, in that I was asked to do an event in Astor, Florida, which is in Lake County. So it's right on the edge of the forest. And when I got there with my partner, the first thing I noticed is we were having a conversation no more than 2 or 3 feet away from each other, and yet our voices were echoing, which was weird, right? Because it's Florida. There are no mountains. There are no, and we're so close, it shouldn't be like that. And I noticed just a weird glaze to the place. Light was playing in a very weird way. And I was like, I don't think that this is... I think waves are being manipulated here somehow. Now, I've had my time. I'm a folklorist now. I track ghostly legends, but I spent 20 years being a researcher and being more on the science, the pseudoscience side, and being an investigator. And so that both of those things intrigued me, because Astor has so many ghostly legends and so much going on that it drew me in. And then all of a sudden there were these weird physical things happening. So all of a sudden I started to realize, just like the Bridgewater Triangle, I kept being drawn to these small towns in the Ocala National Forest or on the border of it, people in the area get mad because I call like that whole area the Ocala, and they're like, "Are you talking about the town Ocala? Are you talking about the forest?" I'm like, "I'm talking about it all, that area." And as the more I talk to people, the more this is what I've heard. And you and I were talking before off camera about you don't know when something's weird unless you've been there a long time, right? Like you can have something to judge it against. People who live in the Ocala and the nearby towns are totally fine with the fact that the geography that they live in changes. That they can be riding a dirt bike path, right, or an ATV path that they've been riding for 20 years, and at a certain point it goes to the left, but some days it goes to the right. And it's a tree or that they've put a hunting stand in can be there on Tuesday. It's not there on Wednesday, and it doesn't come back until Friday, and it's untouched. The entire geography shifts. And so if we're talking about like what is the unifying theory of so much paranormal is this idea of, and you hate to use a buzzword, but this idea of multiple universes or vortexes and things like that. Mm-hmm. You have, anecdotal evidence that there is something weird, that things go places and then come back later. And then you have, of course, some kind of partial scientific idea for it in terms of waves just don't. Pictures that you take in the Ocala look as if the whatever setting you put it on, whatever the lighting was when you took it, it doesn't matter. It's going to show you the picture that it wants to show you. That's
so wild.
It's not as if it's like one crazy person sitting in a cracker house with a shotgun, and some moonshine telling me these kinds of stories. These are police, they're firemen, they're hospital workers telling me in multiple places in the Ocala and multiple people from these areas doing it. So it's one of those things that they just go, and when you ask them about it, you're like, what are you talking about? Right. How can there be a cemetery behind your house that sometimes isn't there when you go? And they just go, it's the Ocala.
And they're just matter of fact about it. They're just like, I
call it the Ocala syndrome, because it's just like, yeah, well, what do you want? That's what happens.
I need to spend more time there.
After everything I said, you want to spend more time there?
I love weird stuff. You have no idea. I live for that.
Go with you if you go, because it is one of those things where there's this. I mean, it's profound for some people, right? So there are all these places where spiritual energy kind of converges, and so you have this. The Ocala is famous for the rainbow people, who are there. It's basically a musical festival. And everywhere else in the country that has these, the people go home afterwards. But the rainbow people don't. They stay in the Ocala National Forest. But you find people who work with energy, cults, things like that, dark side, light side, they find their ways to these places of energy because the work they do and the intentions that they have are more powerful in them. That's why you have places like the Bridgewater Triangle in Freetown. That's why you have the Ocala, is because there's some kind of juice that's flowing there. There's a lot of bad stuff going on there in the real world and in the spiritual world. But there's also some people who are really able to use that power in a positive way. So, you always I'm not sure if it's quite worth it, because there is so much negative stuff that goes on there that it's kind of hard. And someone was mentioning, the Green Swamp as well. And the Green Swamp is not too far away. And the two areas are connected underground through phosphorus mines. Yes. So it's pretty much just a railroad of energy between the forest and between these other places. And so
are there ley lines also in these areas?
I'm going to be honest with you, only because I stray away from that now in the work that I do, that I haven't hit upon it. But the ley line, I mean, they've got to go somewhere, right? Ley lines go all the way around. So imagine, at least on the lateral side, that there's got to be stuff that hits Florida.
So what are some other crazy wild cryptids that are here in Florida?
So here's another one. And I'm sorry, guys, for the men who are looking to come down to Florida, you got to get your stuff together before you come down, because the other one that is really interesting is the Coyote Woman. So
the Coyote Woman. Okay.
the Coyote Woman is seen on your side of the Ocala. So she's seen in, I'm not going to give you the full rundown that I give it, but it's basically what is the town of Paisley. So it's again in Lake County. In the story, the town is always misidentified as Rosewood, but there is no Rosewood, Florida in that area whatsoever. And there never has been. The towns in Central Florida, this Central Florida, change all the time. So tracking legends and tracking where something, I've worked with a cryptid gentleman, Dave. I always forget his last name, but it's like Gunsound or something like that. He does a lot of like the water based ones. Like we have Pinky, who's like Nessie in the same area. He talks all the time. He's like, I have no idea what this is. Like, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. I found it. It used to be called this town. It used to be called this town. So this takes place in what is now Paisley, but it's never been called Rosewood. And I was told this story by a guy who approached me who said, have you ever heard this story before? Because my grandfather used to tell it to me. So he would be walking down the road. And by road, I mean like dirt bike path, like ATV path, off-road vehicle path, like not what you would consider a road by any stretch. And as they would walk and they were heading towards the lake, the grandfather would always tell him when they passed the cemetery, oh, that's the cemetery of the Coyote Woman. And he would tell him the story. So the story goes that the Coyote Woman, she was a young girl. She was 12 years old, and she fell in love with this man. And her parents absolutely 100% would not let it happen, right? And so it wasn't that, she was 12 and he was 17. It's that she was white and he was black. So they used to sneak out to see each other, and they would meet in the cemetery because it was the quietest part of town, and they would, kiss and I'm sure do nothing but kiss and talk about, sports or whatever. And so the father found out about it, and he found the guy in town and he beat him half to death, and no one jumped in to help him. No one would stop it. All of the whites in the town were cheering it on. All the African Americans in the town were like too scared to have anything done. And so he drags him off into the woods, and the guy's never seen again. Most people believe that he actually just left the area, not that he was killed. But she completely flipped out. She went to, she goes into town. She sees his blood on the ground, and she's like, what is this? Why didn't no one do anything? She kind of curses the town, which is important, right? So this is what crosses it over between a cryptid and a ghost story, right? So she curses the town. She goes home. She gets her father's gun, and she kills her father.
Gosh.
She knows that she's now in trouble. Her mom is going to be completely freaked out. Her dad's now dead. The man she loves, who knows what's going on. And so she runs off to the one place that's safe, the cemetery. And she was lying down kind of in the cemetery, and she's crying. And all of a sudden she starts to hear coyotes swirling all around her, right? And so she's crying heavy, and they're running faster. Now, coyotes don't run in packs in circles around places, right? And so she's crying. Now she's screaming. And all you can hear is this howl of the coyote with a woman's scream underneath it, right?
Wow.
So coyote, and then a woman's scream underneath it. And then finally, she puts the gun to her head and she commits suicide. But instead of dying, her body starts to physically change, right? And she leaps out from the cemetery as this half woman, half coyote falls into the middle of the pack, and they all run away with the howling and then with the screaming, right? And so this creature that looks like the way it's described when people have reported it, seeing it in the woods, it looks like a woman, and then the woman goes behind something and it comes out the other side as a coyote, right? Wow. And so it's like a zoom transformation. So it's not a half and half. But I was like, well, that's an amazing story. And he's like, well, no, there's more. So him and his friends, the thing that you do in that town to prove your manhood is you go to the cemetery, which is actually called the Shockley Cemetery. If you look at the picture all the way to the right, like that's the actual, that's looking out at the cemetery towards the road. And they would go there, they cross their arms, they lie on the graves, right? And they start to chant essentially "Coyote Woman," right? And as they do, they start to hear these coyotes that are in the woods. They seem to be like going around in circles, but it's unlike any other coyote sound because it has this scream of a woman underneath it.
Oh
And they
my
say
gosh.
this guy has been like, I've been out there 7, 8 times, and every time we do it, and we've been out in this woods, and if you don't do that, and if you don't go to the cemetery, it doesn't happen. But then other people say, just like the Stakini, she's stalking the woods. And especially if you're out there at night and you're a bad man, the Coyote Woman is going to get you. So basically, there are a lot of people who go missing in the Ocala, and we've made up a whole bunch of folklore to make up who's exactly taking it. And so you're left with this kind of, all right, well, a lot of that doesn't make sense. Like the town that they're saying never existed. The cemetery is by the founding family because it used to be called Shockley, Florida, or Shockley Town of Florida. You have the fact that coyotes didn't exist in Florida until the 1970s. So if this story is generational, there's no way that his grandfather heard it from his father, kind of thing, right? So what you have is something which people are freaked out about, which seems to be hunting them in an odd way that doesn't sound like any other animal in the woods. And so even if it's some other kind of cryptid or some other thing going on, they've made up this story to explain what that beast might be.
Wow. Holy cow. I've never heard either one of these cryptids.
Well, then aren't you glad I'm on today?
Yes. So what other wild ones do we have?
Well, I think you and I were talking about it, but I think it's interesting that the skunk ape is often considered either an Ocala creature or it's considered an Everglade creature. Mm-hmm. But skunk ape type, Bigfoot type creatures have been seen all over Florida. Like you and I were talking that maybe, and of course you've got the audience for it, so I would love to hear their opinion on it. Probably if you were to make a Mount Rushmore of Bigfoot pictures that people outside of the world of cryptozoology know, the one of the skunk ape in Sarasota is up there with the most recognizable picture, but no one talks about it anymore.
Nobody talks about it, but it also doesn't look anything. I mean, I've had 2 sightings. I had a daytime sighting and a nighttime sighting, and it didn't look anything like that Sarasota skunk ape picture. I mean, that thing just doesn't look anything.
So we were in Sarasota.
Catherine, thank you so much.
We were in Sarasota tracking it's Mayaca River State Park, right?
Oh my! That's my favorite. Oh my gosh! So, I love Mayaca.
So we were there, and the first time I went by myself. The second time I went with my partner and my 2 kids. Right. So we were tracking 2 ghostly legends that were there.
Thank you.
Right. And so we kind of were looking into them and exploring the locations that are identified, in these 2 legends these ghostly legends that also take place there. And my partner and my daughter, who was probably like 10 at the time, it was like, well, while we're here, let's see if we can contact skunk ape. Skunk ape is a tree knocker, right? So why don't we try to knock on some trees? Mm-hmm. And there was, and I don't know if this is a coincidence or whatever, but there was a metal cage, like half sticking out of a swampy area in the forest, right? In the park. And obviously it's for hogs, right? If you see a cage like that and it's someplace in Florida, they're trying to catch hogs. But we happen to be near that. And so the 2 of them started clanging on the wood, right? Banging on the wood with their walking sticks. And they were doing kind of rhythmically, like bum, 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 bum. Mm-hmm. We got back, and so you'll understand because you've been there. We got back in our car and we went back to where like the restaurant is. And we were kind of doing a loop to kind of touch upon some of the places that we had been to just kind of revisit them. And everywhere we went, audibly, you would hear that same rhythmically, only it seemed like it was on metal, like metal on metal, like clang, 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 clang,
Wow.
to the point that we thought there was something wrong with the car, right? Because it was rhythmic and constant enough. Now, that area, it's, if you were to drive it, it's like a 15-minute drive between the ends of it. So you're talking, it's,
That's true.
it's a large area.
Yeah.
So this has got to be what, skunk ape mixed with the Flash to like get between those places, unless there are multiple ones and they're communicating to each other saying the crazy ghost guy and his kids are coming to your end, so be careful of what's going on here. And the most insane part is that I was like, I want to tell this story in one of my presentations a little bit after that. And so I was listening to it so I could get the clip of the clanging. And the one time we have that I can clearly say it happens, I am talking to my daughter. My daughter says something, and then the entire digital audio warbles for about 10 seconds. And then my partner says, it just happened again. Did you get it this time? Did you get it this time? It just happened again. And so the one clear time we tried to get that banging, something completely messed with our equipment and didn't allow it to happen.
Interesting. Yeah, Mallorca's a little on the different side. I do love Mallorca. It's one of my favorite places too. I mean, but things are see now I think that in Mallorca things are different as far as there's so many odd things that happen in Mallorca. I feel that way about Mallorca, the same way you described, the Ocala. Like,
yeah. Well, it's funny because I wanted to check that, right? Because I was like, this seems like the kind of place, and what I always do is, from my perspective, I think it's my background with Freetown and stuff like that, is the idea of that, like, all right, well, what are the crimes that happen here? Right? Are there murders that happen here? Because I tend to find that the strongest spiritual places tend to also attract serial killers and true crime and stuff like that. It's just something that I've noticed over time that I first explored in like my first book, Dark Woods, that is kind of cut out of the Ocala book because Arcadia was like, dude, we're a Haunted America book. Like, we don't want to hear about we don't want to hear about Ted Bundy having parties with the other serial killers at Stark Prison. Stop that. But Mallorca has that. It doesn't have the crime aspect of it. Like, I tried to find those things. It has a lot of alligators, but it doesn't.
That is very true.
I remember the first time I went there, I have pictures of this beautiful lightning storm I took. Like, you would have thought I was a professional photographer. And I remember being like in one area and I'm taking the picture. And I was like, wow, that's beautiful. I'm going to get in before the rain. And I look, and there's an alligator like 10 feet from me, just kind of walking by, like so used to humanity that he doesn't even attack me or anything. And I was like, where the heck? I realized there was like 7 right in my vicinity. So it's and the other skunk ape location that doesn't get a lot of word of mouth, but everyone in the area talks about it, would be Ormond Beach. Would be Bulow State Forest, but even more than that, Tomoka State Forest. When I went there tracking the legend of Tomoki, the Native American who is seen in that area and things like that, when I was asking the rangers, and I was like, hey, I have a question for you. They were like, oh, is this about skunk ape? And I was like, no, I haven't heard anything about skunk ape here. And it was so interesting because usually the next question is like, it's something weird or something. And those rangers were like, oh, do you want to stay here after the park closes so that you can track Bigfoot? And I was like, can I take you up on that later? Because I like that idea.
Can I get a rain check, please?
Yeah. And there's not a lot of publicity about it, but people who are in the know always talk about that area also being filled. And that's an area that, like we were talking about, has a lot of dark history to it, and it's interesting because so many of the stories and the ghostly legends and the weird happenings have to do with Florida's version of witchcraft. And so many of them are kind of just connected to these stories that involve people casting spells or people doing things like that, which is, once again, these areas are places where spiritual people find. Or
Well,
that.
one of the places that a lot of people down here always talk about is the Devil's Tree. I'm sure you're familiar with the Devil's Tree. And there's a big misconception about the Devil's Tree because the original Devil's Tree, most people don't know where the location of the real one is. So people used to started going to another tree and then they thought that was the Devil's Tree and then they started doing very bad things there at that tree. So now that tree is also haunted. So it's a weird thing. But
Yeah.
you know what? Like I literally, and someday I'm gonna try this, but I haven't found the right people because I think you need the right kind of people to do this. But I literally want to go to the fake tree, and I want to see if we can release all of that negativity and heal it. Like
So
I feel like maybe it could be healed someday. I don't know. It's
whether
my
it comes
positive thinking.
so whether it comes to the true crime aspect or the paranormal aspect,
Hmm.
I have no. It's not arrogant for me to say I have more knowledge of Gerard Schaefer than pretty much anyone, other than maybe his ex girlfriend who wrote the book, whose name is escaping me right now. London. I can't remember her first name. Here I am saying I'm an expert and I can't remember her name.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about
But
it. Let's talk
the
about the
Devil's
Devil's Tree.
the Gerard Schaefer is, and I was working on an entire. I was going to do a podcast that was more. My podcast is like spontaneous. I refuse to have any kind of, and I don't do guests. I do stories. I refuse to have any kind of script. I'm like, here's what we're talking about. Here are the notes. Let's go, because I want the authenticity of like the nature of the storytelling. This was
And
going
the
to be
link
more.
to and a link to your podcast is in the description of the show, guys.
Thank you. I
So
appreciate that.
definitely go there. It's
This was
awesome.
going to be more of a scripted one because there is so much myth around. Oh, look at a spooky South Coast fan. How you doing, Stan Stones? There is so much myth and misunderstanding and misinformation about Gerard Schaefer that he himself is folklore. And I wanted to do a true crime, and I'm still working on the script and still working with someone on it that is intermixing this true crime aspect of it and then bringing in the legend parts. Because when you read the majority of stuff about the Devil's Tree, like you were saying, it's completely wrong. And I even have friends of mine that have written about it and stuff like that. And I'm like, I hate to tell you, but he was never convicted of crimes that happened there. He didn't die. He wasn't put to death in here. Like, this is a guy who was one of the most evil men who in the state of Florida's history, who other evil men like Ted Bundy and Otis Toole embraced him as a brother. And Ted Bundy even said, this could be urban legend, but Ted Bundy even said to him, "Thank you for giving me the inspiration to kill two women at once." The Devil's Tree is a great debate, right? So it's one of those things where it's, do people come to the Devil's Tree to do bad things because it has a reputation, or has the bad things that happen there burst some kind of bubble that invites other people in, right? It's a chicken and the egg kind of idea. And my belief, if you go pre-Schaefer to other stuff that's going on there and non-paranormal things that are going on at that park, that there's a lot of, just like the Lizzie Borden house, people think is one murder, and there's multiple things that have happened pre-Lizzie and post-Lizzie. These places, I think, draw bad things in. I think Gerard Schaefer, based on other murders he's committed and tracking his other stuff, he seems to find places that have a history of darkness, almost as if he's drawn to those places. So it's not as if he's doing things and he taints the ground somehow, right? Like it seems much more of Gerard Schaefer and other people like him are drawn inexplicably to these places, which then feeds them, and then they cycle through. And so all of the lore of the Devil's Tree, I think is totally true in terms of, like, yes, cults have shown up there, but I think that they're little flames, and these big events that are drawn to it create huge fires from it. And so then we then find ourselves, places like Goatman Bridge, horrible things have happened there. And most of them are post when they became famous, right? In other words, something happened, it kind of took advantage of what was there, and now people find their way to it because it's got the juice and the magnet.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so I was dumb enough, which I never do. The only time people say, "Aren't you scared things will follow you home?" The Devil's Tree is the only time that I felt, in doing this for almost 30 years now, the only time I felt anything ever really came home with me, because we were stupid enough to click off a piece of the bark.
Yeah.
We were like, because that's part of the legend, and that's what we do is we do the legends exactly as they're told. And our car pretty much broke down on the way to Casadega after that, right? And so we got rid of the bark, and the car seemed fine, and everything was good. But my partner we decided, because we couldn't find any place to stay, we decided to just drive all the way back to Lee County. And she kept saying, "Will you shut off your phone? I'm trying to sleep." Because by this time, it's like 3 a.m. And I'm like, "I don't have my phone on." And she said later, she kept hearing like an old school phone ringing, which I had no intention of telling her at the time, is one of the classic symbols of demonic infestation. Like the beginning parts of it are this bell that are ringing. People report that all the time. And then we had similar, if not almost exactly the same nightmares. And I don't even dream, never mind nightmares. Similar to almost exactly the same dreams for about a week afterwards. And since we left the Devil's Tree, for all people who like evidence, since we left the Devil's Tree, there are at least 4 different locations where we got EVPs that sound exactly like the EVPs that we got from the Devil's Tree. And so that means, to us, it means that at least for a while, Gerard Schaefer was following us around. And I'm pretty sure I know why, too. So,
well, my son, the last time that he was there investigating the Devil's Tree, he got some, I don't even know if I really want to classify them as like disembodied voices or if it was like EVP, really. Like it could have been, it kind of seems like it's both. It's weird. Mm-hmm. Just the loudest screams just into the recorder, just like long, drawn out, loud screams. And I was just like,
yeah, we got something similar, like
there
at the Devil's Tree. We got like, instead of screams, we got really long, clear moans, like growls and moans and things like that.
Wow.
Which we then got at other places. But we were up in Sanford at a place called Shiloh Cemetery, which is supposedly the site of a serial killer dumped a body there.
I gotta hang out with you more, for real.
And they're clear cut. And I've never really compared the voice on the EVPs to voices of him in interviews. I just know that the voices we're getting are similar. But this one was a chatty Cathy, and all his energy is upon attacking my partner, who's a woman. And it's you talk about like people get like freaked out when they hear EVPs that are like get out and stuff like this. This is like swearing at her, calling her the worst things you can possibly imagine in clear sentences. And so I really do think that he's out there and he pops in different places. And there's one murder. So I can already see by your comments, your guests, your listeners are researchers, right? Mm-hmm, so research this. I'm not going to tell them how to spell it, but they're going to have to spell it themselves. Little Miss Panisofsky, which is the most famous unsolved murder in Florida. It just passed its 50-year anniversary. It's called Little Miss Panisofsky, and it's in the think of like Bushnell, Brooksville, like that area. And so it was about 50 years ago. It's like 52 years now, I think. And they've been obsessed for 50 years with trying to figure out who she is, right? And all the research I've done, including police records, no one ever talks about who killed her. It's always about who was
trying
she.
to try to identify her.
And she is a case, like, as technology has changed, every time there's a new technology in identifying people, they apply it to Little Miss Panisofsky. So, like, it's all that. I'm a firm believer that Gerard Schaefer is the killer of that woman. Mm-hmm. And so, in a very weird way, I feel that he keeps popping up in my life because he's like, I want credit for one more. Now that I'm dead, I want credit for one more. I'm willing to call myself a serial killer. You've got to prove to the world that I did this. So,
yeah,
I see some people are asking where I'm from. I'm originally from Cambridge. I spent a lot of time in Woburn, but my family is originally from Cambridge. That's kind of where and then I lived in New Hampshire for a while.
There's a lot of stuff in New Hampshire. I've heard a lot of crazy stuff from New Hampshire as well.
You know, New Hampshire is a lot like Sumter County, Florida. People don't talk about it. So you have these great things like, you know, my parents' favorite restaurant of all time was Country Tavern before they closed it. And you hear about Blood Cemetery, and you hear about, mountain people, up in the White Mountains. And then there are these isolated little stories. But for the most part, having lived there for so long, people don't talk about their ghosts. People don't share their stories. Wow. And it's, there are some places in Florida, like I was just saying, Brooksville loves their ghosts. They advertise them. They have big things having to do with it. Yeah. And then literally the next town over, which is in a different county, Sumter County, they don't talk about it at all. And getting things out of them, that's kind of one of the big books that I'm working on right now. Getting them to say anything about any of these stories, even when they're presented with proof, they don't do it. So that's New Hampshire, I feel is the same way.
Interesting. Any like lesser known cryptids that maybe we would know about, other than the Coyote Woman and
so we have especially in the Ocala, there's a deep history of spirit animals, and so there are these animals that roam. So what they used to do in that area, because Florida is famous for its sinkholes, obviously, and so tribes would identify where these sinkholes are, and they'd make kill zones out of them. And so they would rush the animals to where the sinkholes were, which may have developed recently or whatever, and they would kill the animals. And those places, like a few people talked about it in the Ocala, they'll be camping near these sinkholes, and all of a sudden they just have these white, like Patronus type creatures that just burst through their camp. And sometimes they go through things, and then sometimes they go, they kind of like jump over things. Sometimes they hit things and destroy them. So that's kind of reported in different parts of the state. You also have what I think are Pukwudgie reports.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. Pukwudgie reports.
Yes.
I mean, I've heard of people talking about that they've seen Pukwudgies. I've never seen one myself, but where are people seeing Pukwudgies in Florida?
People have once again reported them in the Ocala. And once again, it's the same locations because these things seem to gravitate towards the same area. When we were doing a different kind of tour through Mayaca, my son clearly said he saw a Pukwudgie who was checking us out, like seeing like what's going on here, what are they doing here? It's interesting because years ago, a friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm working on a case. I know you're the person to go to about Pukwudgies. Let me tell you the details of this woman's story, blah, 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 blah." And so he tells me the story. And it's just like a typical thing. She's walking in the woods. She sees this small creature. Then the creature who disappears. Then the creature visits her, like over the course of the next week, a few nights over the course of the next week. And he's like, I'm like, yep, sounds like a Pukwudgie to me. Like, was there anything else that happened? And he's like, well, she's hesitant to talk, and I'd love to check it out, but it's all the way in Florida. And he didn't know I had moved to Florida by that time. And he's like, it's in this small town called, and he names Cape Coral, the town that I live in. He's like, and I was like, dude, I'm literally there right now. And then a few weeks ago, or probably about more like a month now, a friend of mine who does a lot of investigating in the area says we've been hearing reports of these ghost lights in this one particular area. And so it's where I am is if it's the epitome of man's intrusion upon nature. This is per square foot where I live has the most number of canals per square foot of anywhere in the world.
I know Cape Coral very well.
Oh, you do? Okay, I'm sorry you know it.
Yes, I do.
And it's only gotten so. In other words, and they're all artificial, right? All these canals are artificial, and it's gotten worse in the last 3 years because it's been a very popular place for people to move. So what once was I was literally alone on this street. I have a house now 2 deep in every single direction. And so there's been a lot of intrusion upon the forest. When you have a lot of intrusion upon the forest, you tend to get Pukwudgie reports because A, they get put to a smaller location, and B, that seems to be their trigger is being on their land. And so he's telling me the story of the ghost lights, not knowing the story of the Pukwudgie, and not knowing that the two things are connected, right? And I'm like, we got to go out there, man. Those are Wonkas. That's what the Wampanoag call.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the relationship between the lights and the Pukwudgies.
Okay.
Because I don't think a lot of people really know that there's a actual connection.
There is. There's the Pukwudgie trifecta, I call it. So when people are telling me a story, I let them tell me the entire story to see if these elements are there. And then sometimes it might be a different kind of cryptid. It might be a misidentification of a forest animal or something like that. But when they start to mention that there are lights along with it, then my ears start to spring, right? So Pukwudgies are known to be tricksters, and they're known to be, especially back in the day, extremely violent and aggressive. Not so much today. They seem to be more like, I'm just going to intimidate you to the point that you don't come back.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the day, they were known for committing homicides. So in the history of the Pukwudgie, they began to kidnap children. They began to draw people out into the woods and kill them. And the story goes that when that happened, they were able to harness the souls of the people they had killed, and they kind of owned them. And they were these ghost lights, these orbs, and they called them Wonkas. And they were able to then use those lights to lure people into the woods. So the 2 clear encounters that I've had with Pukwudgies, both of them were marked more by the lights than by actually seeing the Pukwudgie.
Wow.
And so, when you were talking about New Hampshire, one was in New Hampshire in a location that we now know it wasn't called a Pukwudgie at the time, but now doing it, we can kind of understand that the Pukwudgies were literally attacking people in this cemetery. When I went there were these lights that kept drawing us into the woods, and we would follow them until finally I was like, guys, there's bad stuff that happens. I didn't tell you, but there's bad stuff that happens in this cemetery, and I think we need to get back out of the woods from this. And as we're going, the lights kept trying to draw us in until we got to the point where we were in the cemetery, and you would think that we were on stage because it was just pop, 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 pop. Like the lights were just going crazy around us. And then a very similar thing happened when we went to Indiana, because Indiana is the next hottest spot in the country for Pukwudgie activity.
Wow.
And it kind of is like the key to everything about Pukwudgies is in Indiana. And when we were in Mountain State Park in Anderson, we were watching what seemed to us to be a Pukwudgie kind of tracking us and seeing what we were doing. And then all of a sudden, once again, these ghost lights happened. So people... what the relationship seems to be they use them to gather people or to bring people, to lure people in, which is weird because the whole gig of a Pukwudgie is get away. So
right.
It seems more of that these Wonkas are just maybe trapped in the areas that were traditional Pukwudgie hunting grounds maybe back in the day. But then the third element, and this is when I know it's real, really real, is there seems to be a connection between Pukwudgies and shadow people. And so of the reports that I've gotten, at least 80% of them also report, and I never ask. I always wait for them to kind of say something like, oh, by the way, so for the person who lives in New Hampshire, it would be Wilton. It would be in Vale End Cemetery.
She lives in New Hampshire. She's terrified to bring her service dog out at nighttime.
They seem to be watching it, right? And if you read the folklore of the Wampanoag, you clearly see at some point the folklore of a Pukwudgie completely changes as it gets Christianized, and it says these Pukwudgies are controlled by the devil or by demons, right? And so they follow them in darkness. Like whatever the phrasing is, it's very much like as if Pukwudgies, lights, dark people hanging out watching it. And so when I get those three things, I know that, especially not if I don't elicit it, right? Like if they just kind of are telling me the story and these are the elements they tell, that's how I know they're there. So if I know I'm talking totally over you, but
no.
So
what's coming to my mind is that I have friends that have been to the LBL, and everything that you're describing right now regarding the lights and the shadow people, like they were seeing they were seeing orbs, they were seeing these lights in the woods, and they were seeing like look like shadow beings or some sort of something peeking out from behind the trees. I mean, are there reports also of, Pukwudgies in Land Between the Lakes? I mean, do you have any idea there, or just curious?
It's one of those things where it seems to be much more isolated, right? But then when you get into, so we were in Daytona, and we were talking about there's this great haunted story, and there's two haunted stories, and they seem to be connected. It's called Lillian Place, and it's called now it's known as Veterans Bridge. And we were talking to the person who was doing the work on Lillian Place, and he very, very, very casually, as we're talking, is like, but you got to be careful sometimes because all those fairies are hanging out by the water and and I was like, oh, you mean like, and he's like, no, I mean like the little people. The little people are always by the water here, and Casadega, which is right nearby there. I mean, it's less than a half hour between Lillian Place, and they have a famous history of little people and fairies as well. And so it seems like it's not out there, but you engage people on a talk, and eventually it comes around to there are these little people that are hanging around here too. And I think a lot of it has to do with the filters that people have, right? So especially since Dark Woods and stuff and the Triangle books, people process small people in terms of Pukwudgies. But anyone who hasn't been exposed to that is going to use their own filter. They're going to say it looks like this, or it was doing like this, or they're going to use words like fairy or gnome or gremlin or something like that because that's what they're familiar with. And then when you talk to them about details, and it's important to realize the term Pukwudgie, while it is an Algonquin and Iroquois word, right? When people used to meet in Indiana, there are all these different tribes from all over the country. They would go there to bury their most sacred dead in Mountain State Park. They would talk, but they're all different languages, right? And so some words caught on that other tribes then took away and used, right? One of those words was Pukwudgie, and it became like a blanket term, how we might say monster. It became a blanket term for all these different tribes, like small men of the woods who are pissing us off. It became like the blanket term for that. So there are, even in New England, there are several different varieties of them. So to kind of nail them down to one specific thing is kind of hard.
Wow. You're like a encyclopedia going on right there. Like it's all like, I don't even know how you keep
who's to even think that I've been lying about everything this entire time and making it all up as I go.
I know. I can't even believe it. Like it's, I just appreciate what you do because there's a lot of research that goes into these types of books and these the folklore and interviewing and, witnesses. And it's a lot of work. And I really appreciate the type of
thank you for that. I think my background was as kind of a latchkey kid, but my house was a library, and my mom would be like, "Go to the library after school, and I'll pick you up when I get out of work at 6." And
That's
so I was
awesome.
just constantly in the library, and that's what I was drawn to from the age of like 8. And so when you do that, you start to see connections between different kinds of stories and things like that. And I think that as an adult, I've just done the same thing in terms of when I read a story or when I read a report about something or an online report or in a book or someone tells me something, I start going like, okay, if I break that down to its elements, it's got this, 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 and this.
Right.
I've experienced those things and it's similar to this and making those connections. So I like to think that my strength is in drawing the connections between these stories that I hear.
It's amazing. So what do you got coming up next? What's coming up for you?
Wow. Okay. So the exciting thing is, for those who are into ghosts, the exciting thing is that I've just finished. We wrote a book. Tim Weisberg, who does Spooky South Coast, and I wrote a book a few years ago, 12 years ago now, called Haunted Objects. That was a really great book that really bombed hard. The world kind of just wasn't ready for it because they liked their ghosts and they liked their folklore and they didn't want any mixing of the two, right? Because this is like the heyday of ghost adventures and ghost hunters, and it was like, if it ain't science, we don't want it. Like and so the book mixes and goes very freely between those two things. And so the book eventually, just because of what happened with the publisher, it went out of print. It went out, or they stopped printing it. The company that published it went under, and we just got the rights to it back. And so we've spent the last few months, and it just officially got published on Amazon. So the new revamped version of Haunted Objects comes out tomorrow, which I'll be promoting the hell out of for those people who are fans of Tim and I's work. I was just asked to write a kids version of the Ocala book. So my publisher said, the Ocala book is doing so well. Can you write this? Can you rewrite it for 8 to 12-year-olds? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe. I've been a middle school teacher for 20 years. I think I should be able to handle that.
I was going to say that is right up your alley.
It is, because it's like the one complaint people have about my writing, although there are many complaints about my writing. But one of the big complaints is you spend too much time talking about like the sociology aspects of it. Keep with the spooky stuff. And so literally, that's all the book is taking away all the fancy stuff and leaving the. So I've got that, and then I'm working. So I'm doing these 3 things simultaneously. As I'm trying to be a dad and be a teacher and everything. The big book that I'm working on that I had to put aside when the new Ocala book came was it's a book about Sumner County. It's a story of a swamp witch told with multiple distractions, because to fully understand the story of this haunting of a swamp witch in Florida, I have to tell you a whole bunch of other stories. So I'm constantly stopping and going like, wait. Before I tell you that, you got to understand this first. So it's really kind of a very fun, exploring narrative that's really hard to write because it's really weird. It's natural, which makes it hard to write. So that's what I'm working on right now. And of course, the show and everything like that. And if you are in Florida, follow me, because over the next 30 days, I have like 27 gigs, like going to libraries and pretty much everywhere in Florida talking about ghosts. So
that's so awesome. Do you ever do some of the? I know that Bill Slevin has got some interesting, like he goes to a lot of libraries, local libraries, and does a lot of like free events and things like that. So that's kind of what you do. You go to the different.
I don't do anything for free. What are you, crazy? I'm just gonna go to some random place. Like I did an event yesterday because it was fun. It was a con and stuff like that, right? But for the most part, like, yeah, man, you got paid. What are you, crazy? You want me to drive to like these weird towns in Florida and just rely on people who are gonna buy my books? No, my books aren't that good. Pay me to talk. So. No, to be honest, like I haven't done much in your area.
I love you.
I haven't done much in your area. Like I do a lot on the West Coast.
Keep it real, man. Keep it real.
But I'm trying to open up the East Coast. So if you know any librarians, tell them, to get on the ball and start scheduling me.
Okay, I'll do that. I will do that. You're the best.
Anyone who wants to pay for a trip to Key West for me to talk about ghosts that are not Robert, I'd be more than happy to.
That are not Robert. I know. Let me tell you what. The one place that I would love to somehow investigate would be the Coral Castle. And I don't know how the hell to get in there to get it done because it just
it's
will
interesting
not.
because when I was on Spooky South Coast, when I used to book the guests for it, we had like the leading expert on Coral Castle come in. So this is probably like 15, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there were no reports of ghosts whatsoever. Like Coral Castle does not have a history of ghosts. This idea that Coral Castle is haunted is a fairly new idea. And it's kind of like you wonder whether it's, well, let's generate this so more people come, or whether it's, well, I mean, look at it. It's got to be haunted.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Because he put so much of himself into the construction of that place. How could he not be there? I feel,
it's the perfect combination of materials. The story, was he using some kind of energy that was there, mixed with his intent and his love and stuff like that?
Love for her.
How can it not, if that place is not haunted, we're doing something wrong in this world, right? Like,
exactly.
That's kind of feel of it. So
that's why I want to go there so bad. But
my bucket list is not far from there. Like I wanted to hit Coral Castle as I wanted to hit this place in the Keys that was the site of the 1935 hurricane. That killed like over 500 people in this one section. I'm going to say the town, and anyone anywhere close is going to yell at me because I always mispronounce it, which I do for a lot of things. But is it Isla Morta?
Isla Morada.
Isla Morada. It's on there. So if you want to come, girl, and when I go and like legend trip the 3 different places that are supposed to be connected to this hurricane, you're more than welcome to come along with that. So.
I am there. Count me in.
Have you been to Coral Cut? From where you are, have you been to Coral Cut?
No.
Oh, okay. So maybe we'll talk off the air about Coral Cut, because I think based on where you live, like that would be an easy place, and I would love to see someone try to do an actual investigation there. It might be interesting.
Okay, definitely. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. It's been a blast for a Sunday.
Right.
Right. And I'm a Patriots fan, so I don't care that the Dolphins are up 42 to like 7 or something like that at this point. But I keep getting like little reports of it out of the corner.
Oh, really? You're like, oh yeah, okay. Well, sometimes those Dolphins do okay. I don't know.
Yeah, 1974. Let's that sounds like some kid who was really popular in high school trying to relive their glory days.
Right.
I'm sorry. Patriot fans should just shut up. So I'm doing that. So
it's 1972. It was the 1972 Dolphins.
Oh, okay.
Perfect season.
All right. There you go.
But it's been a long time since then.
Beautiful. I stand corrected. It's been even longer. Okay.
Right. Well, thank you. If you would please just stay backstage. Let me say goodbye to my peeps and thank them for being here. But thank you. Wow, this has been fun.
Thank you very, very much for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you in a minute. Holy cow, guys. I learned so much today. I'm like, what an amazing guest. It doesn't get any better than that, right? It really doesn't. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Larry Newman for being my newest member of the channel. Thank you, Larry, and Randy Harrington for your super chat. Thank you so very much. Catherine Gay, also, thank you for your super chat today. And Patrick, thank you for yours as well. You guys really, really are amazing. It helps keep the lights on in this little studio. It keeps it going. And I really, really appreciate all of your support, love, encouragement. And I've got some amazing shows still coming up. I do have tomorrow night, I've got Mark Fiorentino. We are going to be talking about slip waves. Slip waves, as far as I understand it, are how we can possibly travel in, like it's like you're in a little bubble and you're in a UFO, and how you don't get mushed around and killed. So Mark is going to, since he's the brainiac and the scientist, is going to explain how that all works. So we're going to talk slip waves. So then on Tuesday night at 8:00, I have Daniel Benoit and Michael James from Bigfoot Zone and from Forest Monsters. So that'll be Tuesday night at 8:00. So definitely keep your notification bells on, guys, because you don't want to miss any of these upcoming episodes that I've got coming. And what do we always say? What do we always say here at my channel? You guys should know it by now. Please remember to what? Always spread love and kindness wherever you go. See you guys tomorrow night.